looking at the major poems in the Torah to see what they're all about. We quickly saw that these poems are important to the entire structure of the Torah. At the end of every major section, a character gives a poem, much like how in a musical, characters break out into song at important moments in the story. And these poems are all filled with similar themes. They all build on God's poetic promise to send a rescuer to eradicate evil and crush the enemy, but who will do so at great cost to himself.
Now we'll look at how 3 more major poems by Jacob, Balaam, and Moses all draw on God's poetic promise to send a rescuer, and how together these 3 poems tell us more about what this rescuer will do and how we can recognize him. So after God's poem, the evil problem gets worse and worse, and then we're introduced to a guy named Abraham. God promised Abraham that it would be his family that would restore blessing to the world, meaning the offspring of the woman would come through Abraham's family. Then the story continues to trace the promised offspring through Abraham's younger son, Isaac, then Isaac's younger son, Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons. At the end of his life, which is the end of Genesis, Jacob breaks out into a poem.
Got it. After God's poem, the story traces specific descendants of the woman in search of the one offspring that God promised.
Right. So at the end of Genesis, Jacob starts his poem by telling his sons, "Let me tell you what will happen to you in the last days." And then he explains how the events that have already happened in the story show what will happen in the future. And the other poems we will look at also say that they're about the last days.
Okay, so the poems in the Torah interpret how the events in the story teach the reader about the future.
Yeah, so Jacob calls his sons to him, and you might expect him to bless all of them, but then he doesn't bless his first 3 sons. What he says to them sounds more like a curse. For the first 3 sons, Jacob poetically retells their story and explains what that means for them. Jacob poetically bypasses these first 3 sons, and then when he gets to Judah, he gives him a blessing. The majority of Jacob's poem focuses on the blessings to Judah and the blessing to Joseph.
Okay, I could see that, because Joseph and Judah's stories are tied together. In the story, Joseph becomes the picture of a suffering, rescuing ruler. So does he promise that the offspring will come through Joseph?
Actually, Jacob takes Joseph's story and applies it to Judah. For the first 3 sons, Jacob retold their stories and showed them what that meant for their future. But then for Judah, he retells Joseph's story and applies its future meaning to Judah. In Joseph's story, he had multiple dreams about his brothers bowing down to him. And at the end of the story, Judah and the other brothers actually do bow down to Joseph. But Jacob tells Judah, "Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you." He goes on and says, "Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches, he lies down as a lion. And as a lion, who dares to stir him up? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes." Jacob uses the imagery of a lion to describe Judah in the last days. And even more than just his brothers bowing down to him, we see that he will be a king because of the scepter and ruler's staff.
We already know this poem is about the last days because Jacob says so. And then all of these brothers die way before the story ends, and Judah was never a ruler. So, this poem must be about the descendant that's coming from Judah, not Judah himself.
Right, so everything we've read about Joseph and his story is now being applied to the future ruler who will come from the line of Judah. In other words, Joseph's story teaches us about what this descendant from Judah will be like. Do you notice anything else about Judah?
Yeah, the whole story is about the rescuer who's going to crush the head of the enemy or the serpent. And now we see this future ruler from the line of Judah handling the head of his enemy.
So Jacob's poem draws images from God's poem about an offspring of the woman who will crush the head of the serpent and develops those images. Reading Jacob's poem in light of God's poem and the whole story, we see that the offspring of the woman will be from the tribe of Judah. He'll be king in the last days and be the one to take the serpent and his seed by the neck.
Okay, got it. Joseph's story of being rejected, suffering, and then being raised up as a ruler is applied to the descendant of Judah. But then Joseph is blessed as well.
Yeah, the author doesn't abandon Joseph's story after this poem, but continues poetically showing how Joseph's story foreshadows the king. The king we know will come from Judah. Even though Judah's future descendant will be like Joseph, the poetry addresses Joseph directly, as well as continuing to explain the meaning of Joseph's story.
Right, that's what all the poems are doing, showing what the events in the story mean for end times. So in Jacob's blessing to Joseph, he brings up how he endured suffering and didn't falter, and then he says about Joseph, "The archers provoked him, and shot at him and were hostile toward him, but his bow remained firm, and his arms were agile. From the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel."
Yeah, so now we have some new descriptions of the rescuer. He will be like a shepherd, and he's called the stone of Israel. The poem goes on and uses the word blessing over and over again, and then says, "May those blessings be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of the one distinguished among his brothers." So Jacob's poem painted this image of a mighty eternal king descending from the tribe of Judah who will crush his enemies. and the imagery he associates with this king is a lion. Then Joseph is connected to a really important image, the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Let's see how all these images are blended together into one person in Balaam and Moses' poems.